Good morning in Germany and in Europe, and good afternoon, good evening in Asia and China. Very happy to have you on our Sino-German webinar on the perspective of Germany's China policy after the election. As you know, this was a very tough election, and we are, of course, especially interested what does it mean for the China policy. However, after a long night, we have finally a decision which probably will go for a grand coalition between the CDU, CSU and SPD together will bring the government, and we will discuss what could we expect for the China policy. With me, as always, is Rüdiger von Rosen. Moderating this, we have announced 3 speakers. So far, we have 1 in the chat. Good morning, Mr. Sommer, Christian Sommer. Herr Butek. Morning. Maximilian Butek from the German delegation will join us shortly. There were some technical issues. Unfortunately, Ms. Godehard had to cancel her participation due to sickness. He caught the cold and he was not able to join us. But anyway, with Mr. Sommer and Mr. Butek, we have old China hands here who can, especially from the perspective of business, very much interpret the result and what does it mean for German China policy, and also what is expected from business for the German China policy. Let me say 2-3 sentences more. I think independent from the government, there is a great pressure for the new government in China to rearrange, let's say, the German-China business and general relations. And this is, of course, related also to the relatively poor performance of the German economy. And this is related to the high stakes the German business has with China, but it's also very much related on the policy of the new administration in the United States, which obviously is weakening the transatlantic relationship, which perhaps brings more momentum for the German-China relationship in the future. We will see, as I already mentioned, a grand coalition. I would guess that the likelihood that this will improve somehow the China policy of the new government increases, because in principle the CDU is more business-oriented and the Social Democratic Party is in principle not so critical with China, which are both good conditions to have a change in the China policy, let's say, to the better. Yeah, so far from my side, Maximilian Butek is just arrived. Can you hear us, Mr. Butek?
I can hear you. I'm still challenged. I'm a little bit challenged by the technique. Maybe Christian Sommer could start, and then I take over as the second one.
Yes, Christian, we will start with Christian Sommer. And it doesn't matter too much that we can't see you. Most important is that people and we can hear you. And I hand now over, having said that, to Rüdiger to introduce Christian Sommer for the opening speech.
So the temperature in Germany is fine. We're expecting the summer, more or less. We start, of course, with Christian Sommer, 25 years China experience. This is quite a long time, a law degree from Kiel, and CEO and chairman of the German Center Shanghai. We have both our speakers coming from Shanghai. So we are playing games between Germany and China, and I can undermine the opinion of Horst Löchel. I think the result we have will encourage Chinese-German, Chinese-European relations in the future. We are looking forward. So, Christian Sommer, it's yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Rosen, and thank you very much, Professor Löchel, I'm very much also can also exactly confirm what you already said. I think everybody at least is a little bit released that we most probably have a government formed out of 2 parties, and 3 parties is more difficult, everybody knows. So, but again, today the topic, of course, I would like to talk to, and Max will definitely continue, is the potential influence a new government may have in regards to the China policy of Germany, and what kind of wishes the German companies operating in China may have to the new implemented government. And let me broaden a little bit. The question first is, because we have to distinguish between the potential influence of the outcome of the election and the potential influence a new government may have. May I say the outcome is a 20% plus of the AfD. And why I'm mentioning this in terms of the China policy is we have to expect that the AfD obviously will send delegations to China and eventually vice versa. And that they have a different view on China, I think, is obvious. In particular, Alice Weidel is the most present politician in social media with Chinese subtitles, and I cannot judge whether everything is rightfully translated, but I will say that even social media is not necessarily political relation, but the point is the AfD will not strengthen the idea of a coherent German, European political approach towards China. So I believe that this is not to be underestimated, how a new government will handle the policy towards China. So at least the strengthening of the AfD is not easy in general to make the policy of a government and then with the EU in a very smooth term. But again, we are talking obviously about the potential new government, and yes, we have to wait who will be appointed as a new foreign minister. And I may say that I trust that from a Chinese perspective, and even from a perspective from the German companies operating in China, I trust that everybody is relatively happy that we will most probably see a very new foreign minister. We always have to be, as we say, you know, somebody's going, be aware what's coming next. But I trust that we have a foreign minister which is more economic friendly without losing the need to criticize China if necessary. So therefore, I do believe also, which you already said in the beginning, I expect a more China-friendly policy, but friendly doesn't mean to have just, you know, like agree to everything what is necessary. The very interesting point will be with the new government, will the China policy be back into the Chancellery office? Because in the past, before Scholz, basically China policy was always a policy which was done basically by the Chancellery rather than the foreign ministry. So my observation of the now still in place, but old government, I may say, is this was not well balanced. So Scholz has a different approach than obviously Baerbock, and that's, I believe, is also not good to have a good relation with a foreign country, and then in particular with China. So I do hope that we see a clear signal who is in lead of the China policy, and in the past it was often the Chancellery. So we will see how the new government will take this. In particular, we all have to acknowledge that the complexity of the topics a chancellor and a new government has to handle is everything but easy. So that is one part which I also believe is interesting to see, and I cannot say from the German company point of view, I would like to see that the chancellor is taking over or the foreign minister is taking over. The point is we need one voice from the German government and not a different voice from the foreign minister and the chancellor. I think that's what we would like to see. And obviously, best case scenario, which is most difficult to achieve, is if we then have another common voice, a coherent voice, which is coming from the European Union. Of course, that is not only up to the new government, but one thing is for certain, that Merz, as a potential new chancellor, will have to put a much more stronger effort to be present in Europe and to reunite, may I say, with France to form a strong coalition on the European level to bring the European Union, also towards China in a certain direction. The one point I would also like to see, and we are very interesting to see how the new government will handle the current China strategy, which is in paper. I was always sharply criticizing the China strategy. I believe it was actually not even a strategy. It was a paper where some points are listed, and you never know who was who to be addressed to the points. Strategy normally is done for the internal reason rather than to translate it into Chinese, that also the Chinese could read it. Even you don't translate it, they can read it. So I believe even it was done in the context of the European Union that we get rid of this partner, competitor, and rival, and actually get rid of the rivalry, because I believe if you point out somebody as a rival, it is very difficult to come to terms in a diplomatic way. Obviously, we have sharp and fierce competition with China, both in politics and in economic terms. And surely we have also a lot of topics where we try and we hope that China be a good partner. But I would really advocate to say, please let us cancel this rivalry as this three topics: partner, competitor, rival. I believe that is done more harm than it's useful. So I will see how the new government will handle that. And I do hope, without giving up the criticism, as I mentioned, that rivalry is not something which we would need in the terms dealing towards China. I believe, again, as I said, it is not very much helpful. Now is the question, what are the problems of the German companies in China? May I say, is it really, super helpful if we have a support from the government? Obviously, yes, but I still believe that the German companies operating in China, they have majorly different topics, which are Chinese competition, pricing, quality, and I mean quality of the Chinese competition is getting better and better in a lot of fields. Innovation, cooperation with the innovation. I hope that also the new government will allow a much better cooperation between universities. I know that it's always a risk to a certain extent, but I do believe still it makes sense that we do have that kind of cooperation. So I believe that should be better from the new government, the overall cooperation, including the part of innovation. And I believe that's also what the German companies are hoping for. In general, a positive relation with the politicians will help, but again, it won't change the Chinese business of German companies in China. Is there any influence of the policy from the US? And I'm now talking in particular not about the headquarters in Germany, obviously that is, but I'm talking in particular about the companies operating in China, the German companies operating in China. And I believe most of the companies operating in China the German companies, they produce in China for China. So any restriction is at least not as important as it would be for the German headquarters. Surely there is some influence. What can you do? What can't you do? There are medical instruments, aviation. There are companies that directly export from China to the US. But I believe in general, in volume, it is relatively less and little. Therefore, I wouldn't give too much say to that point. This is more a point of the headquarters rather than the companies operating in China. So, yeah, therefore, I think that's all what I have to say. From my side, first of all, I would like to finish with one thing I have heard today morning. Today morning, the General Consul of Shanghai, Dr. Riedel, invited the business leaders and also the association leaders to him in the residency and see, you know, what we think about this kind of election outcome. And I heard one interesting point. But one of the company representatives was saying, you know, we feel always we are not the GMs or something representing. We are more or less the chief adjustment officer here, being in charge of a German company in China. So hoping this is what we definitely are. So thank you very much. We have to stay flexible, but in general, I would put it positively. I believe we will have a government, a foreign minister, which will take more care of the German companies and the German economy in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian Sommer, for this positive, constructive approach. We are looking forward. Of course, there is a chance that we might get a Vice Chancellor Pistorius, whether he prefers to be in defense or whether he prefers to take this over. There are other possibilities, and we are looking forward. But in any case, I think most of us expect, even in atmosphere, a bettering of the situation. Maximilian Butek, you are the next one, and we are very much looking forward for your remarks on our today's topic. Please start.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I believe you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And once again, my apologies for the technical issues I had. Thank you very much for hosting this very important event, because I mean, geopolitics is one of the most pressing topics for companies around the world, right? Not only for European and US companies, but also in the global South. So let me try to set the scene by first giving you an introduction, very quick, what's the German sentiment currently is, then how we see the tensions between China and US, and then what we, as the company representatives, believe the German government needs to push forward to and go ahead. So first of all, 2025 is a really interesting year for the for China and for the world, obviously. Like if you remember 2015, that's 10 years ago, Li Keqiang announced the industrial policy of Made in China 2025, which initiated the transition or the transformation of China's economy. I believe back then we did not know the full implications of what that actually means. And now 2025, we have to see, okay, what's left from this concept and didn't work. Did it work or not? And while we were talking a lot here over the last 2 years that there is a tremendous lack on local demand, and Christian Sommer also touched it on the side, at least, that there is a lack of consumption and there is a very fierce competition. This competition probably comes for many of us as a surprise, but it's just a natural consequence of what happened the last 10 years, mainly driven by overcapacities, not only by China's industrial policies, but also overcapacities in what we are having in Europe, etc. And then it comes to an acceleration or an escalation on geopolitical tensions. And I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, I always said you don't have to look so much towards Berlin. You have to look way more towards Washington. And in the year 2025, I believe that it became quite clear that there is not so much negotiation space when it comes between Beijing and Washington anymore. But now it also became quite complicated when it comes to European Union and the US, right? So we are in a situation where our companies are highly affected by these global tensions because they cannot calculate them anymore. And it's super hard for them to estimate or forecast the future. So 70% of our companies say that they are already affected by geopolitical tensions. So that's one of the pressing topics here: how to deal with the lack of demand, how to deal with the fierce competition, and how to deal with global competition. And those things are interlinked, right? I mean, the overcapacities in China led to a very aggressive export ambitions of Chinese manufacturers, which caused even further tensions between, mainly the EU, US, and China, which led to an acceleration of the lack of investment confidence, what our German companies need so much. Nevertheless, when Trump announced the first round of tariffs towards China, the Chinese government did not appear to be too sensitive on that or too nervous. It seems that they were very well prepared. And I can say that there are mainly 3 things which made the Chinese government more confident, and also the companies or even the stock markets, if you look at that. In Trump 1.0, his first administration time, China still had an exposure of overall exports to the US by approximately 24%. Now, of Trump 2.0, they are only with 13%. The second thing is that back then, China was sitting on this bad real estate bubble, right? The economy was still so much dependent on the real estate sector, including the infrastructure sector, that was a very risky play for China back then. And they knew they have to burst the bubble, but that it will be extremely painful. Nevertheless, they did in 2021. And the real estate market at least more or less normalized already. And the third thing is that back then, Trump really could hurt China with restrictions on high tech, right? It began with the sanctions of Huawei, that Huawei could not purchase advanced chips anymore. Then the blacklist started. Now we have over 800 companies on this blacklist where American companies cannot work with anymore, but also no other foreign companies who deal with American companies. And then, of course, the sanctions under the Biden administration. Nevertheless, China has proven that it is not as dependent on US technology anymore as before. That's a whole different topic, which probably we can discuss for hours. Nevertheless, I think it's important to understand that the threats coming from the US don't hit China that hard anymore. Nevertheless, of course, it's still relatively bad for the sentiment because everything is so unknown. What really changed in 2005 is, I believe, the startup DeepSeek, which released their new large language model, and that really came as a super big surprise. And this not only came as a big surprise to the Americans or the markets, this also came to quite a surprise to the Chinese government. I spoke with a couple of representatives of the Chinese government, and they said they did really not expect that the competition in the artificial intelligence area could change overnight. And this really did. And I feel that China is perceived again as investable, and China is again received as competitive. And on the other hand, the supremacy of US technology also became under threat, especially if you look at the artificial intelligence, which might be leading the future technological developments. It's really a huge breakthrough of the Chinese government. And I believe also that this breakthrough created more confidence in the market, on the one hand, on the private investment sector, but also in the consumers, that this boost is way more effective than any kind of stimulus caused by the government. So when we look in March to the two sessions where normally the big announcements are made when it comes to economy, we don't have to expect too much, I believe. So there won't be any big programs. The Chinese government will focus on what I said at the beginning, Made in China 2025. And it seems that all the investments into the high-tech sector, which happened over the last 10 years, bear fruits now. That there is a yield, and we see it not only in the artificial intelligence, we see it in the robotics sector, we see it in the quantum computing sector, we see it in digitalization, in biotech, in life science, etc. Why am I using 10 minutes out of my 15 minutes to elaborate on that? Because I think it's really, really important to understand what's happening here, and at the same time to understand the challenges for the new government. So let me come now. What are our expectations on the government, or what are the changes? I wasn't.
Sie sind eingefroren. Schalten Sie uns mal frei.
The real act of the German government, the real actions of the German government towards China were not as feasible as they announced it in different papers, etc. So, you know, Robert Habeck came to China, and he was open to listen, and he tried to engage, and also the Ministry of Economics still engaged again in projects back then, right? In the in different dialogue formats. The Chancellor also, when he came here, I mean, he came twice. With his last visit, he was, I don't know whether it was the end of the China strategy, but he made it quite clear we want to cooperate, and we want to find areas where we could create situations where we benefit both from. Now, I believe it has changed a little bit, because Trump made it quite clear that he doesn't see the EU as friends as before. Let's call it that way. That's at least how it appears. And this comes at a quite interesting moment, while for the first time now, I don't know, for 8 years or so, US became the most important trading partner for Germany again. So it seems that our transatlantic relationship is not as future-proof as we would have expected. And on the other hand, we also started this, what Christian also quoted, we started to talk a lot about systematic rivalry and a lot of competition, and neglected, at least in the public discussion, a little bit the cooperation, right? So what can the German government do now? And Christian also referred a little bit to the political landscape. What I want to summarize it together, and I want to summarize that, and maybe Christian wants to say he didn't mean it by that, but I think it's about the new government has to deliver now, right? So if it is the coalition between CDU and SPD, they really have to deliver now, and they have to prove that they can boost the economy. And how can they boost the economy with having a trade war with the US and with China? And so they probably better start to build up a position based on purely based on own interests. So they would be better off if they try to rather take a neutral stance and try to foster engagement with the US and China. And this is not only because we need China or profits generated in China to invest in Germany and also to secure jobs in Germany. We also need it to engage in the innovation system here. And it showed that China provides the world open source LL or a large language model, which basically the world can use for free. And more big tech companies are implementing DeepSeek, while OpenAI is rather a closed model, right? And a very expensive and not much better model. So Germany also needs to see how can they engage with China to benefit from the innovation ecosystem without coming in a position out of weakness, right? So if our relations with the US got worse and worse, and we need China then we are in a weaker negotiation position than rather now, while China is still very open for cooperations on all levels. And therefore, I believe we also have to start thinking in Berlin, not only what could we bring to the table, but really what do we want from China? And as I always try to describe the situation, China will develop further, right? And the US will also develop further. We better off if we play a role in this game. So because if you are not sitting on the table, then it might be that you end up on the menu, right? So better take an active role based on European interests and therefore see how to engage with China. And that's what I want to summarize this discussion with, is basically we need to learn to re-engage with China, not in a naive way, in a very informed way, but at the end, I think any kind of confrontation with our important trading partners, either on the US side or Chinese side, will hit the German economy quite hard.